Welcome to Mobile Math Lessons on the Go. Today's learning goal, by the end of this lesson, I should be able to multiply double and triple digit positive numbers together using something called the column model. And again, I'll be doing this without the use of a calculator or any other technology. It's important to remember that multiplication is a shortcut for repetitive addition. And when we see the word product, that's one way of saying we're finding the final result of terms being multiplied together. So product, multiply, times, they all come from the multiplication family. Big warning here, the column model is a very efficient way to solve multiplication problems, but it requires a strong grasp of multiplication concepts. It is strongly, and I can't say this enough, strongly recommended that the use of the area model be mastered before continuing to this model. Okay, so the column model is going to be a very efficient way, but it's going to have some interesting little tweaks to it that are going to perhaps cause some people some problems. So make sure we have the area model under control. So here's our 4 times 13 again. Just a reminder, I can break the 13 up into a 10 and a 3, and I have two areas, a 40 and a 12. So those two groups come together to give me my total of 52. Column model 1 is probably the nicest for making the jump between the area model, the distributive property, to this column model. So when we start this problem, the first piece is going to be a 4 times a 3, and I get a 12 from that. And the second part, and here's where we have to be careful, this is a 4 times a 10. So this is a 40. And when we add those two pieces together, we get our 52 that's been quite popular so far. And notice the 12 and the 40 show up in our area model. The column model number 2, which is one of the most popular models out there, but not a lot of people necessarily understand where all the parts come from, and you'll see why shortly. Partly because of the way people say things. 4 times 3 is 12. Now, instead of writing the full 12 underneath like we did in the previous model, we put a placeholder of a 1 over top of the tens column. And now, here's where people get confused. The next part is said 4 times 1 plus 1. And people will write a 5 here. And you'll notice I get the same answer of 52, but the 4 times a 1 is not really 4 times 1. It's 4 times 10 for 40, plus one more group of 10 for a total of 50. And that's where the second model becomes a little challenging, and I caution you, don't go to the second model until you're incredibly comfortable with some multiplication facts. So to create that 52, or use the placeholder on top of the tens column, I had 4 groups of 10 plus one more group of 10. Okay, and we'll try 2 more examples here, and hopefully you can follow along. 18 times 25, so I have our area model again here up in the right corner just for some landmarking. So if we get lost, we can always come back and check out our area model to make sure we're comfortable with all the parts. So let's try column model number 1. I'm going to start with an 8 times a 5 for a 40, and I'm going to start with an 8 times a 20. I don't want to say a 2, it's an 8 times a 20 for 160. The next part will be 10, I don't want to say 1, 10 times a 5 for 50, and 10 times a 20 for 200. And when I add those parts together, you should see I get the same 450 as I do in the area model. You'll also see those 4 key numbers there are the same 4 numbers I have in the area model. Okay, let's try out this tricky model number 2 here. And I will say it the way people will try and explain it to you, and then we'll talk about where the problems arise. So the first part is 8 times 5. So we write 40, but we don't put the 4 down below like we did in column model number 1. We put it up top. And here's where people will get confused. This is how they will say the next part. 8 times 2 is 16, plus 4 more is 20, and they will write that number. Now 20 is not the same as 200, but what they've mistakenly said is 8 times 2, but it's really 8 times 20 plus 40 more. Okay, and you'll notice these two pieces right here make up that first line. Okay, now the second part is where a whole bunch of problems will arise. You will be told to just magically put a 0 there. And if you understand what we're actually doing with multiplication here, that 0 will make complete sense, because I'm not multiplying a 1 times a 5 for the second line. I'm actually multiplying a 10 times a 5. And 10 times a 5 is 50, and there it is. And here's where the language will let us down a second time. The next part is 1 times a 2 is a 2. Well, again, it's not 1 times a 2, it's a 10 times a 20, and a 10 times a 20 is 200. So it's a little bit faster, but it does have some pitfalls and traps if you don't know where the numbers are coming from. But you will notice I get the exact same 450. So my advice is master the area model, explore column model number 1 until you're really, really comfortable. And then if you want to explore column model number 2, you'll notice it's a bit less writing, but there are some tricks and traps along the way. Let's try one more, and we'll use some big numbers here. So we're going to multiply 28 times 85. So I have my area model again in the upper right corner here as a landmark, something we can check in on to make sure our numbers make sense. So let's start with column model number 1. 8 times 5 is 40, so that's this piece. 8 times 80 is 640, so there's my first two numbers. The next part is 20 times a 5. So 20 times 5 is 100. And then lastly, 20 times 80, and this is the real big number, that's 1,600. So if you take a quick look and you compare the area model to the column model number 1, you'll notice I have the exact same four numbers showing up, and I end up with 1,600, 700, 2,380. Okay, so let's try this tricky model. Here we go. 8 times 5 is 40, so I put a 0. I carry 4 to the tens column. Now here's where the words will lead us astray. 8 times 8 is 64, plus 4 more is 68. And we write the 68, but we really know that's 8 times 80 for 640, plus 40 more. And that's where the 640 comes from. Okay, so that's a shortcut or a cheat right through there. The next part is, remember, we have to put this magic 0 in here to start the problem, but we know now that that's really because it's 20 times a 5, and that would be 100, but when we say it in this problem, it's 2 times a 5, or 10, so we put a 0 and we carry the 1. 2 times 8 is 16, plus 1 more is 17. Okay, and that's where those numbers come from. But really what we've done is 20 times 5 and 20 times 80. And you'll notice those two numbers show up right there. So we saved a little bit of time and a few lines, but we potentially added a lot of confusion. So again, I'll reiterate. Area model first, column model number 1. If you're feeling really adventurous, try column model number 2. All right, I'll ask you to press pause on the video now and try the following. So if you could find the product of the following using the column model, so please press pause now. Okay, welcome back. So hopefully you've had a chance to try these. So I'm going to do the first problem, 9 times 24, with the column model number 1. So 9 times 4 is going to give me 36. And then a 9 times a 20 is 180. If I add those together, 6 ones, 11 groups of 10, carry the 1 over, and I have 216. I'm going to use column model number 1 again for 15 times 12. So 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 10 is 20. Just going to switch colors here to help see the second part. Now ready? This is 10 times 5, or 50, and 10 times 10, or 100. So when I total all of those up, I have 10, 20, 80, 180 total. Now for the last one, I'm going to try and use column model number 2 and see if you can follow along. So 4 times 6 in the first column is 24. I'm going to have a placeholder of a 2 in the tens column. 4 times 3 groups of 10. Okay, so we'll say that is 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 above is 14 groups of 10. That's how I get the 144. The second line, now this is where I have to remember, I'm starting with a 20, so I need that 0 placeholder. So 2 times 6 is 12, but 20 times 6 is 120. That's why I need that 0. So 2 times 6 is 12. I carry the 2, or put the 2 down there, I carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 more is 7. And then I'm going to total those up. And Again, I get a slightly shorter solution, but there is some confusion on where all those parts come from unless you're really comfortable with the multiplication process. I'll say it one more time. Area model first, column model number 1 second, column model number 2 third, only when you feel you have a really strong background and you're comfortable with this. So thank you again for watching. Please watch again and pause where you may have had difficulty, and good luck in your future math problems.